Flying to Thailand has changed, and it's pretty intense. There's lots of confusing new documents, multiple tests, and processes that are just constantly changing. So strap in and follow us on our entire journey from the UK to Thailand in 2022. It's definitely interesting. This video was filmed in January 2022, and many of the processes for entry into Thailand have already changed since then, so just bear that in mind if you are researching your own trip. Now, on with the film. For the best part of the last decade, me and my girlfriend Emma have held a special place in our hearts for the land of smiles. And ever since we left Bangkok over 2 years ago, we dreamed of returning to our favourite country once again. But like many things during the pandemic, international travel became very difficult, and the process of getting into Thailand was at best tricky and at worst completely unappealing. So we waited it out until we finally saw what we thought was the ideal opportunity to make our return. But even then, it didn't go quite according to plan. We originally applied to enter under the newly launched Test and Go scheme, which allows vaccinated tourists to enter Thailand by taking one PCR test in their home country and another when they arrive in Thailand. We had everything booked in and approved to arrive under that scheme, but then things started to change. With the virus situation getting a bit more precarious around the world, there was an additional day 5 test added to the entry requirements, but that wasn't all. There was also rumours about Test and Go being completely scrapped to stop the spread, and as our flight date got closer, everything started becoming a little bit stressful. So, although Thailand opened its borders to vaccinated tourists on the 1st of November 2021, they didn't stay open for long. The rise of the Omicron variant meant that the Thai government actually closed things up again just over a month later. And by this point, we had already booked our flights, we'd got our visas approved, and we'd already received our Thailand passes, which I'm going to explain more in a minute. But it was just hard to tell whether our approved documents were still going to be valid to enter Thailand. There were rumours circling around the internet that there was going to be a cut-off date for people to arrive by, so we just waited and waited for the official word, but nothing came. So we decided to take a bit of a gamble, because there's still another way to enter Thailand. The Phuket Sandbox scheme allows vaccinated tourists to quarantine on the island of Phuket for 7 days. And that's not all. You can freely roam around the island for that time, as long as you take a PCR test before you leave your home country, and you take another 2 PCR tests when you get to Thailand. And after that, you're free to explore the rest of the country. So we had a manic few days changing our hotel bookings and booking in those extra tests in order to apply for the sandbox. And then we had to apply for a new Thailand Pass. And the Thailand Pass is essentially where you upload all of your COVID-related documents for getting into Thailand. And I've made a list of exactly what you need to do. You go onto the Thailand Pass website, you fill in all of your information, and you need to upload the following documents. You need to upload 1 passport scan, your certificates of vaccination for all of your doses, a proof of payment for your SHA Plus approved government hotel, a proof of payment for your PCR tests when you get to Thailand, a proof of payment for a transfer to take you from the airport to your hotel, and finally, you need medical insurance that covers at least $50,000 in COVID cover. We reapplied for the Thailand Pass just under a week before we were due to fly, so it was really stressful waiting to hear back from them, but luckily we got approved again within 48 hours. But our worries are not going to end there. If you test positive in Thailand right now, there's a high possibility that you're going to get moved to a quarantine hotel or hospital for at least 7 days. We're going to Thailand for 3 months, so we can afford to lose a week from the start of our trip. But if you're going for a 1 or 2 week holiday, then I think you're taking a bit of a risk. So that is the short version of the stressful few months we've had trying to get our documents to enter Thailand. But now there's just one more piece of paper we need to get before we leave the UK. Right then, we are on our way to take the first of 3 PCR tests that we're going to have to do within the next 10 days. If this first one is negative, then we can board the plane from London, and then we've got 2 more tests to take in Thailand, one when we land and one on day 5. So let's get this one over and done with. At the very least, this test has kind of been within our control because we've basically been self-isolating for the last 2 weeks. The next 2 tests, well, you know, we're going to be in airports, we're going to be on a plane, so it's a little bit out of our hands if we catch COVID during that time, but right now we've done everything we can before this test, and that's all we can do. We've booked this test at one of the drive-through centres at Heathrow Airport because we thought that this might be one of the fastest tests to get results back to us. So let's see what it's like. We used a company called Express Test, which is based at the Terminal 4 long stay car park, and it was completely empty when we got there at midday. Hi there.
How you doing, you alright?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. You ready for this?
I think so.
Yeah? You know how it works?
Yeah.
Okay. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ugh,
I know, horrible, isn't it?
it's not nice. All done.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, that was pretty easy. Luckily, we got our results back by email just over 24 hours later, and it was good news. We then uploaded our results along with our approved Thailand Pass QR code directly to Etihad, and we were officially verified to fly. So the only thing left to do was pack up a very different style of bag for me. That's right, no more backpack. And we were all ready to board our flights the following morning. Well. Today is the day. Today, we start a brand new adventure in quite a familiar place. We packed everything up last night, and all that's left to do is get to the airport, where we're going to fly from London Heathrow to Abu Dhabi, and then Abu Dhabi to Phuket, Thailand. Let's do it. You know, I've imagined this day in my head a lot of times over the last 2 years, but to be sitting here right now, about to go, is still very, very strange. I sort of a mixture between nervous, excited, and just a bit disorientated, but we'll get back into it.
I'm so cold.
Ahead of our flight, we printed out copies of every single document we needed for the visa and the Thailand Pass. We actually made 3 copies of everything, just in case we needed to present them during the journey. As I mentioned before, we were already verified to fly with Etihad, so as we entered the airport terminal, we headed straight for the Etihad verified to fly desk to drop off our bags. And that part didn't take long at all. Well, that was really easy. We just checked in with Etihad, and all they wanted to see was our Thailand Pass, and that was it. The rest was just normal passport, printed boarding passes. Now we're going through security. Well, there we have it. Security was also a breeze. I think it only took about 20 minutes from the time we arrived at the airport terminal to getting through security, so absolutely brilliant. The terminal itself is quite busy actually. It seems like normal times apart from people wearing masks, so we're just finding a quiet corner to wait a couple of hours before we board our flight. My main fear for the next day was not necessarily contracting the virus for health reasons. It was more that I didn't want one or both of us to be quarantined in Thailand after all this time waiting. We ordered some good masks before we left and decided to play things as safe as we could and avoid crowds where possible. And before we knew it, it was time to board. Here we go. This was actually our first long-haul flight since we returned from Bangkok back in 2019, so it was quite a strange feeling to settle into such a long journey again. But this first shift back in the air was a very good one. I've always been quite impressed by Etihad whenever I've flown with them before, and this time was no different. We managed to get a whole row of seats to ourselves, which made us feel much better about the risk of catching anything. And to help out, Etihad provided everybody with a nice little wellness kit, complete with a mask, gels and wipes, which is a nice touch. For the rest of the time, we just ate some food, watched some films, and before we knew it, the sun was setting and we were landing into the UAE. Well, 6.5 hours later, we've landed in Abu Dhabi. So we're now going to connect through the airport terminal and see if there's any other documents that we need to show. We went through security on this side, but apart from that, we only needed to show our boarding pass to get onto the next plane. This next flight was much more crowded than the last one, and we didn't get the whole row to ourselves. So we just tried to sleep, and let's pick it up again when we finally got a glimpse of the Thailand coast. So there it was. We finally entered the Phuket Sandbox zone, where the most surreal part of this journey was about to begin. Well, after about 16 hours of travel, I can finally say, welcome to Phuket. Now, obviously, I'd love to get out there right now and start exploring so I can show you all of the amazing things that this island has to offer. But unfortunately, we now have to wait here in this hotel room until we got our results back from the PCR test that we just took at the airport. They said it could take between 12 and 24 hours, so we're staying put here. And in the meantime, let me talk you through that process of getting through Phuket Airport. We landed at about 10 a.m. local time, and about an hour or so before landing, you fill out a short immigration form, which I remember doing on previous visits to Thailand. Right at the end of the walkway into the airport, somebody was there waiting to check our boarding passes before we were allowed to move on into the main arrivals terminal. Once we were inside, we passed the little welcome sign and straight into a large waiting room filled with rows and rows of little plastic chairs, which is essentially where they make sure that you have all of the correct medical documents ready for inspection. The most surreal part of this bit was all of the ladies on hand wearing full-on hazmat suits, making sure that we had all of the right documents. It honestly feels like something out of a sci-fi movie. You then queue up to be seen at a desk where somebody checks over all of these documents in detail, so this does take a few minutes. But once they're happy, you get stamped off and you're through to immigration, which obviously you can't film, but it's basically the same as normal. We just needed to show our visa approval, the immigration form from the plane, and they also wanted to see our Thailand Pass. So after that, we grabbed our bags, headed through customs and into the arrivals PCR testing. On the way out of the airport, you get shown to another desk here where you present your receipt showing that you've paid for the tests. Then they give you a little swab kit and you walk outside the terminal where there's this row of people sitting inside strange little white boxes, which is where you're going to get swabbed. We got pointed towards one of those boxes and essentially you just hand over your kit to the person inside the box and then they put the swab right up your nostril. Mine was actually okay, but Emma said hers was pretty painful, so be warned about that. But we did get given some little yellow stickers for being so brave. And the final step at the airport was finding our hotel transfer. You give your hotel name to this guy with a microphone and he shouts it out and basically someone just comes to get you. And as you can see, our hotel also had a sign up with Emma's name on as well, so it was very easy. We still had to wait around 15 minutes for our car to actually turn up, but that was the last step before we jumped in and drove down to the hotel. And I've got to say, the whole process at the airport in Phuket is very, very smooth. They've been doing it for a while now, so it all seems very well run. And from the car window, that's when we finally got our first proper look at Thailand in 2022. And I couldn't help but get pretty excited at this point. We'd never been to Phuket before, but it was still unmistakably the country that we just love so much. But there was still some more stress to get through when we arrived at the hotel. At reception, we checked in and they wanted to see a lot of the same documents that we had already shown at the airport. And they also made sure that we downloaded the More Chana app to our phones, which is basically the Thailand COVID tracking system. We then got shown around to our very nice room, and luckily it was nice because we weren't allowed to leave until we received our PCR results, which could take anything up to 24 hours. And they specifically told us that we weren't even allowed to sit outside on our little patio on the edge of the pool, so that was just sitting there like a bit of a tease. So for the next few hours, we fought off the temptation to swim or sleep and ordered some room service instead. And I finally got my mouth around a proper pad grapao again. Look at that! Haha! We watched some Netflix, I did some editing, and then we got a very welcome email. Hey! Well, there we have it. Brilliant news. We have both tested negative for COVID on arrival in Thailand, which is It's a massive relief, really. God, I was just imagining being shipped off to a quarantine hotel or hospital, which is still possible on day 5, but for now, we're clear and we're good to go. And those results only took 5 hours to come back to us, which is absolutely brilliant. So I guess the only thing left to say now is, let the adventures begin. In the next episode, we experience quarantine like no other, spending 7 days on Thailand's COVID island and get the results from yet another PCR test.